Many people are interested in this software strictly for reproducing what they can do when in the same room together, but for many of us there are also exciting potentials in being able to exchange very high quality sound with people on the other side of the planet and still doing it at a very low latency, even though the latency is not quite low enough for us to not notice it. So in this video, I'll share some tests that we did recently on home network connections between California and Zurich. So the way this worked is that I put on a metronome in my own space at 60 BPM, 1 beat per second, and sent that through JackTrip to my colleague and longtime telematic collaborator in Zurich, flutist Matthias Ziegler, who played different rhythms with the metronome that you'll see written out in a moment. So I'm recording his sound into a DAW program through JackTrip, and at the same time I'm recording the metronome as I'm hearing it in my space. So that gives us a very rough way to calculate the round trip distance, because the difference between the metronome beat and what I hear him play is evident in the software, but also we use some musical examples to make it a little more easy for us to evaluate the timing. So in this first example you'll hear Matthias played quarter notes exactly with the metronome, and I've notated on the right side roughly what it sounded like to me back in California. In the second example, Matthias played the last 16th note of each beat against the metronome. And in the final example, Matthias played the third eighth note triplet of each beat, and it sounded the closest approximation to being exactly on the beat when I heard it back in California. So obviously, at this distance, we're getting latency that would make it impossible to play in tight synchrony the way that I showed in the very first video in this series. Intuitively, as musicians, we know this because we can see that being off by an eighth note triplet at 60 BPM is quite a big difference. We could also look at the numbers here and calculate that if that's the case, then the round trip delay time is around 333 milliseconds, making the one-way latency about 166 milliseconds. And as I mentioned in the first video, research has suggested that the threshold for playing in tight synchrony is roughly 20 to 30 milliseconds. That lower threshold that enables tight synchrony really requires that we be within about 500 or 600 miles. But I want to close by pointing out that longer distances and slightly higher latencies don't prevent us from making music together, as long as we take that latency into account and create new kinds of music for this medium. There's a growing community of artists across the globe who've been doing this for a long time. These are just a few pictures from some of the concerts I've been lucky to be involved with. And although the compositional and artistic dimensions of this work are beyond the scope of this video series, it is an area that I hope more musicians are able to explore in the coming years as public and home network speeds increase and as these tools keep improving. Thanks for listening.